Spartan or Marlin or Clover or something too. That's what front ends are about. Okay, so that is the plan. So let me just give a brief recap of last time, snarks from the GKR protocol. Before I do that, does anyone want to ask any questions?
I'm just wondering, are these Spartan and the Marlin, are these used right these days?
Yeah, they are, I think. Okay, so Marlin is used by Alio, as far as I know. It has similar costs to Plonk, which is one of the most popular snarks in use today. Spartan is not used to my knowledge, but I think that it should be. And perhaps next week I'll say a bunch more about that. Yeah, and it might be helpful just briefly to give some big picture stuff, which is I'd say the most popular snarks in practice now would be I guess Growth 16, Plonk, and Starks, which has become shorthand. I think it's confusing for basically fry-based snarks. Anyway, or the particular instantiation of them, that Starkware put forth. And again, like Marlin and Plonk, you should think of as being like closely related in terms of their cost profiles and properties. So like Growth 16, kind of its claim to fame is like it has the shortest proofs out of any of these, but it requires a circuit-specific setup, trusted setup. And also it's limited to R1CS. And people like to use like other kinds of circuits these days, like Plonkish and Air. So Plonk gets rid of the trusted setup. It has a trusted setup because it uses KZG polynomial commitments. It gets rid of these two issues. So it gets rid of the circuit-specific setup. And it gets rid of and it's able to go beyond R1CS. So that's like Plonk and Marlin. That's why they've become more popular than Growth 16. Although people still use Growth 16. So that comes at the expense of somewhat bigger proofs. And then let's see. So Starks get rid of the trusted setup completely. Although there are other ways to get rid of the trusted setup completely. Basically, the trusted setup, it only comes in because of the polynomial commitment scheme, and if you use a polynomial commitment scheme other than KZG commitments, you're not going to need the trusted setup. And let's say they also avoid like elliptic curve cryptography. Although again, there are other ways known to avoid this. And that sort of gives them more flexibility than the elliptic curve stuff in choice in terms of what field people choose to use over work over, and that can have performance implications. Yeah, so that's just a very brief few minutes on the most popular snarks in practice today. Again, Marlin is kind of in the same class, performance profile and characteristics as Plonk, which is popular. And I'll say more about Spartan and Clover and stuff later, I guess. Okay, other questions?
Just a question. So the use of univariate or multilinear polynomial is not related to the arithmetization, right? So you can use Plonk with multilinear polynomials. Multivariate polynomials, maybe. Is that what Hyperplonk did?
So essentially, okay, yeah, Hyperplonk um, wanted to kind of obtain certain performance benefits of some check-based snarks, which is exactly why I think snarks like Spartan should be more popular than they are today, and I've continued to advocate for that. So Hyperplonk kind of like took like the Planck. Um, it's called polynomial ILP, but it's basically the Potter Planck other than the polynomial commitment scheme. Okay, and kind of replaced all the univariate polynomials with multilinear ones, and therefore brought the sum check was able to apply the sum check protocol rather than other protocols that are more expensive for the prover in certain ways. So replace univariate polynomials with multilinear.
Right.
Yeah, so that's basically what you said. Yeah, and then this new paper that's out introduced sort of CCS and Super Spartan and Super Marlin, and kind of pointed out, and so Super Spartan and Super Marlin are like minor tweaks of Spartan and Marlin themselves, and kind of pointed out that basically Spartan and Marlin themselves, you know, sort of directly handle not just not just Planckish circuits, but in fact all of CCS, which is a generalization of Planckish. So Spartan and Marlin like already handle CCS, which generalizes Planckish, is kind of the message. So yeah, so you're right that pretty much any snark that uses univariate polynomials, you can kind of replace the univariate polynomials with multilinear ones, and apply the sum check protocol instead of the techniques we'll see when we cover Marlin that people use for univariate polynomials. And I guess moreover, I would say like everything out there other than growth 16, if you mess around with them, they can support more than R1CS, I guess. It actually is something that's surprising is actually like Planck and Hyperplonk. Okay, actually can't support R1CS. It's sort of a bit of an irony. People think they're more expressive, like these can handle more expressive circuits because kind of one of the reasons people seem to like Planck is because it can handle these so-called Planckish circuits, and there's this misconception that like only Planck can handle Planckish circuits. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So like Marlin and Spartan can also handle Planckish circuits, but more than that, they can handle all of CCS, whereas Planck and Hyperplonk can't even handle R1CS without overheads. So I think people's like impressions of kind of the power of different backends is quite backwards. Okay, so hopefully that little rambling diatribe was a little bit helpful.
Yeah, I actually have some follow-up on this, but it's kind of unrelated to today's topic, so I will ask them in the end, maybe.
Okay, sounds good. Other questions?
I had a quick question just about the flexibility of field choice. And I remember reading somewhere about how it affects the efficiency of computing certain operations are more efficient depending on the field, and I just couldn't remember where I read that and what it said.
Yeah, sure. I can say a little bit about this, about field choice. Okay, so Let's see. So some snarks. Let's start with the following. Some snarks need the prover to do FFTs. Okay. Something to point out is that this is basically everything but some check-based ones, and like even the some check-based ones, like if you use certain polynomial commitment schemes, especially Fry, that will still bring in an FFT. Okay. So only this is sort of I said Starks have more flexibility on field choice. This is actually a situation whereby they have less flexibility on field choice, but I'll explain shortly why in other ways they have more. Okay, so only some fields, support like practically fast FFTs, FST algorithms. Okay, so this is why you'll see people work over fields of let's say of size p, prime p, where p-1 is like a large, or is divisible by a large power of 2, because that's what's going to ensure that that there are these good FFT algorithms. Okay, so like the Goldilocks field, which is very popular today, has size 2 to the 64 minus 2 to the 32 plus 1. So if you subtract 1 from that, you get 2 to the 64 minus 2 to the 32, which is divisible by 2 to the 32. So you can do FFTs of length up to 2 to the 32 in that field, like no problem. Okay, so yeah, that's one thing you might have seen. Okay, now let's talk about snarks based on elliptic curves. And so this is actually what leads to my comments that snarks that in particular use the Fry polynomial commitment, people view as having more flexible field choice. So basically the only inflexibility in field choice is coming from the FFTs in snarks that use Fry. So snarks based on elliptic curves, the field has to match the order, that means the size of of a cryptographic group. Okay, and actually a lot of snarks, if they want to use certain polynomial commitment schemes, that cryptographic group actually in turn has to support something called pairings. So possibly supporting pairings depends on if you're using KZG commitments or whatever. KZG commitments are popular and need pairings. So in particular, this means the field has to be big. So if you want to support, if you don't care about pairings, you can use a field of about like 255 bits. Yeah, so if you do want to support pairings, I mean, the curves people use are BN254, which is like a built-in in Ethereum, which I think is, I actually don't know off the top of my head what the size of that field is. It might be 2 to the 254. That might be where the name's coming from. I do forget. Another popular version, pairing-friendly curve, is BLS 12381, where that field has size 2 to the 381. So even bigger. And kind of that curve became more popular because better attacks on BN254 were discovered. So they started using like kind of bigger fields to make sure that those attacks weren't applicable anymore. Or sorry, they're still applicable, but like that if you start with an even bigger field and even those attacks are still too expensive. Yeah. So in summary, if your snark uses elliptic curve groups, it has to work over like a especially big field. If it doesn't use elliptic curve groups, which in practice today means if it uses Fry, it can work over a smaller field, like this Goldilocks field of size 2 to the 64 or so. And I think those are, there might be some other ways that field size restrictions kind of come in, but those are the two to keep in mind always. So yeah, and I guess my last comment, and now I'm going to get to editorializing a bit, is like, let's say like you're happy to use something, based on Fry. So you have the option to work over a small field like the Goldilocks field, like whether that makes sense. So whether it makes sense to work over a small field, like even if you have the option, is highly application dependent. So let me explain. So, I mean, there's a lot of excitement about like working over kind of smaller and smaller fields. People, are excited about them because like one field operation in a small field is like much faster. So one field operation in a 64-bit field, like the Goldilocks field, especially a structured one like the Goldilocks field, is, maybe more than 4x times faster than one operation in like a 255-bit field. So like if you're, just asking, well, my snark prover has to do X many field operations, that those X many field operations are going to be substantially faster if the field is smaller. But there's a question about, like how meaningful is like one field operation. So let me give a couple of examples. So I'll say like pre-ZK EVM rollups. But before people were trying to support the entire like EVM, the bottleneck for the prover, I'm told, was proving knowledge of digital signatures. And the digital signatures people use today work over large fields. Okay. So if you use a snark that works over a small field to prove knowledge of digital signatures, you're actually making things worse, not better. Right? Like it's best to just work over the field that the digital signatures work over. And you'll see this is presumably why Starkware works over a 251-bit prime that matches like their digital signatures. They call it like the Stark-friendly curve, or like the Stark curve, or something like that. Even though they're using Fry, like they have the option of working over a smaller curve, smaller field. As another example, like I think the basic data type in the EVM is 256 bits. And so like even a 251-bit field is too small to represent one of these. It's sort of like a kind of a tragic, like, off by 5 issue. So as a result, you have to actually use 2 field elements to represent, every sort of primitive data type. And that sort of directly potentially like doubles all the prover costs or something. So, there's a lot of excitement and kind of attention devoted to, trying to push, like things like Fry to like smaller fields. And I think that that's valuable work. I think whether it makes sense to utilize those efforts is actually like very application dependent. And the kind of the public discussion, from what I can tell, has sort of lost the nuance that it really, really depends whether one should be targeting a small field or not. It depends on the application. Okay, so hopefully that was interesting. Another rambling diatribe that didn't have much to do with the planned topic for today. Anyone else want to ask a question? I guess you know now it's dangerous. You can wind up sitting around for 10 minutes waiting for me to finish rambling.
Just one small question. So the FFT from Fry comes from the Reed-Solomon encoding, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly right. So in some snarks, basically they might need to do an FFT for other reasons as well. But like within Fry, there's always an FFT because of Reed-Solomon encoding. Yeah.
Yeah, I never quite understand where that came from, but yeah, thank you.
Cool. Other questions? Okay, so I'll do a quick recap of last time. I'll try to keep it nice and quick since I know we're already 30 minutes in here with all the rambling. So yeah, last time we saw a snark for circuit sat. So the prover claims to know a W such that, C of W equals Y, where here C and Y are known to both prover and verifier. But W is only known to the prover. Okay, and the way this works is the prover uses a polynomial commitment scheme to commit to the multilinear extension of W twiddle. And you can think of that commitment as sort of offering the verifier kind of a box. That box has like W twiddle living inside it. The verifier, it's like an opaque box, so the verifier doesn't actually know anything about W twiddle necessarily when it receives the commitment. But if the verifier goes to the box and say, hey, tell me W twiddle of R, the box will come back and indeed return W twiddle of R, and a proof that the return value is indeed the polynomial inside the box evaluated at R. And we call these like the evaluation proofs from the polynomial commitment scheme. Okay, and then so the cool thing about the GKR protocol is like the prover and verifier can apply the GKR protocol to the claim that so this is apply GKR to the claim that C of W equals Y. And the cool thing is the verifier doesn't need to know anything about W at all to run this protocol until the very, very last step when it needs to know W twiddle of R for a random R. And that's when it goes to the box in the sky. In reality, it goes to the prover and says, hey, prover, tell me W twiddle of R. And the prover comes back and says, the prover's really the box in the sky, kind of aided by the commitment. It says, hey, W twiddle of R is this. And here's a proof pi that I'm like telling you the truth about that. And then the verifier just accepts or rejects based on whatever the GKR verifier would do. Of course, assuming that it also has to check the proof pi. So V checks, that the proof pi. The proof pi that the returned evaluation of W twiddle is indeed, the committed polynomial evaluated at R. And so that's the snark. So we're simulating the idea of the prover like explicitly sending W in full to the verifier, and then them applying the GKR protocol to prove C of W equals R, C equals Y. Where the idea is we're acting like this is what happened, like the prover explicitly sent W to the verifier without the prover actually explicitly sending W to the verifier, because that would violate succinctness. That would be too long a proof. So instead, the prover succinctly commits to the multilinear extension of W. Turns out that's kind of enough. The only information the GKR verifier needs about W is to kind of ask this box a single question. Tell me W twiddle of R. And that's what the commitment to W twiddle allows the verifier to do. Okay, that was last time. Okay, anyone want to ask a question about that? Cool. All right. So let's talk about this Clover snark. So let me just draw a simple example circuit again. Let's say the input is field elements 4032. We got some multiplication gates, got some addition gates. Okay, let's say there's one output gate, which is a multiplication gate. I don't know. Just draw the circuit real fast, make something up. Cool. All right. So in this circuit, if you evaluated kind of gate by gate, this would be 16, this would be 0, 0, and 6. And this would be 16, this would be 6, and this would be, what is that, 96, I think? 16 times 6 is 96. Cool. Okay, so that's the value of every gate in the circuit, one evaluated on this particular input. Let me call this W. Okay, so in the snark from last week, based on the GKR protocol, the prover would only apply the polynomial commitment scheme to W twiddle, so it would only commit to the witness W. Okay, in the snark from this week, the prover applies the polynomial commitment scheme to the whole circuit, right? So it takes the vector, which has an entry not just for every element of the witness, but actually every gate in the whole circuit. So in this example, that vector would be like 96, 16, 6. So I'm just like listing the values of the gates starting from the output and moving towards the input. 4, 0, 3, 2. Okay. And we call this vector, we call this like a circuit transcript. Circuit transcript is just an assignment of a value to every gate in the circuit. And we call a circuit transcript correct if it actually corresponds to all gate values when the circuit is evaluated on a valid witness. So when circuit is evaluated on a W such that C of W equals Y, because that's what the prover's claiming to know, a W such that C of W equals Y. Okay, so yeah, let's call this vector, last night I called it capital W, but I think that may be a little confusing to have a lowercase w and a capital W around. So I don't know, let me call it capital Z today. So the very first thing the prover does is commit with the polynomial commitment scheme to the multilinear extension of Z. Okay, which is, like closely analogous to the snark from last week. It's just there, the prover commit at the start to the multilinear extension of the witness. Here it's committing to the multilinear extension of this bigger vector Z, which is an entire circuit transcript. So like the witness is just like one part of Z. Okay, and now the idea of the snark is that the verifier needs to check that the committed polynomial extends a correct transcript. Okay, and that entails checking 3 things. So let me write down like what those checks are. So one requirement is that, remember like the output gate of the circuit I put in like the very first entry. So let me label these entries of the transcript. Let me give them binary labels in the natural way. So I think I'm going to need 4-bit labels here. This will be like 0000, 0001, 0010, 0011. I'll stop in a second. Yeah, you get the idea. I just, yeah, there are 16 4-bit labels and there are less than 16 entries of Z. So we can assign each entry of Z like a unique 4-bit label. And the output gate is assigned label 0000. So checking that, the output gate of on this transcript has value Y is equivalent to checking that Z of 0000 equals Y. Okay, so that is the output is Y. And here I'm just assuming for simplicity that there's only one output. Things will work fine with more than one output. And yeah, if we take the multilinear extension of Z and we evaluate it at any Boolean input, it'll spit out the same thing Z does. So yeah, let me put a twiddle over Z to denote like, we're talking about the extension polynomial here. That's what's been committed. So Z twiddle is the committed polynomial. Okay. And then you need to check that basically the transcript respects or like the operation that each gate is supposed to perform. So that is like for each addition gate A, if the two in neighbors of A are B and C, that is, if gate A is supposed to compute the sum of gates B and C, then we require that the value assigned to A by the committed transcript or multilinear extension is the sum of the values it assigns to B and C, because that's what sort of gate A being, computing the sum of two other gates, that's what it means. And similarly for multiplication gates. So for each multiplication gate A with two in neighbors B and C, we'll require that z total of A, again, that's the committed polynomial evaluated at A, is the product of its valuations at B and C. Okay, and if all three of these properties hold, then z twiddle indeed extends a correct transcript. Okay, any questions about this? Cool. Okay, so this can be checked. This first condition can be checked with just one query to the polynomial commitment scheme, one evaluation query, right? Because this just refers to a single evaluation, and there are ways to sort of avoid actually paying an extra evaluation query for this that I won't get into right now. But sort of we saw actually one of these techniques with the GKR protocol, to sort of reducing an evaluation of a multilinear polynomial at 2 points down to 1 point. The same sort of thing would work. So let me just ignore this. Sort of we already understand how to deal with this. Again, it's if you don't care about paying an extra query to the committed polynomial, well, this is just one query to the committed polynomial. So okay, so I'm going to focus on these other two conditions from now on. Okay, so these two conditions are a little bit annoying because there's one constraint for each gate A, and exactly what the constraint is, like what B and C are, differs for every gate A. For every gate A, you have to based on A, that determines B and C. So it's just a little annoying. The verifier, doesn't want to have to spend time to iterate over every gate A and figure out what its two in neighbors are and query the committed polynomial at those points. None of that's going to work. So I want to transform these two conditions into an equivalent condition that sort of treats every gate A roughly the same, rather than having sort of a different constraint based on its in neighbors B and C. Okay, so for that, I have to introduce two functions, which, we're already there in the GKR protocol of that we used last week. And so these functions are called add and mult, and they take as input three gate labels, A, B, and C. Okay. Now remember, with the GKR protocol, there was a different, add and mult for every layer of the circuit. But with Clover, there's a single add and a single mult for the whole circuit. Okay, and the fact that Clover is sort of treating the whole circuit as one big object rather than going layer by layer through the circuit, that's exactly why Clover is going to have better verification costs than the GKR-based snarks do. Okay, so we got just add and mult, two functions for the circuit. So add takes as input three gate labels A, B, C, and outputs one if A is an add gate, addition gate, and B and C are its in neighbors, and 0 otherwise. And similarly, mult is the same thing, but it checks, that A is a multiplication gate, and B and C are its in neighbors, and 0 otherwise.
Isn't this the same as in GKR?
It's exactly the same, except there was an add I and a mult I for each layer I. Otherwise, they're exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and just as in GKR, we're going to be interested in the multilinear extension polynomials, which always exist and are unique because the domain of add and mult, if you got rid of the extension, so you were just talking about add and mult, their domain, these gate labels are in 0, 1, to the, there are three of them, so 3 log circuit size. And so any function whose domain is 0, 1 to 3 log circuit size has a unique multilinear extension. So I can just put totals over things, and it's all well-defined polynomials. Great. Okay, so now I'm going to, with these definitions in hand, I'm going to reformulate the condition that, like for every add gate, the value that the transcript polynomial assigns to that add gate A is the sum of the values assigned to the 2 in neighbors, and similarly for multiplication gates. I'm going to translate that into a condition involving add twiddle and mult twiddle that's going to kind of treat each gate the same, rather than kind of doing some kind of switching statement, if you will, based on what the actual in neighbors B and C are of each gate. Okay, so the 2 bulleted conditions that are now off screen, from characterizing a correct transcript being committed, characterizing correct transcript. They are equivalent to, the following polynomial, G of ABC. I'll tell you what it is in a second. Satisfying a property that I call, for shorthand, vanishing over the Boolean hypercube. And let me just write out in full what that means, because at the first time people hear me use that term, they don't know what it means. So that means G of A comma B comma C equals 0 whenever A, B, C are in the Boolean hypercube. So A, B, C and 0, 1 to the 3 log circuit size. Okay, so let me tell you what G of ABC is. So we're just sort of going to define the natural thing that sort of equals 0 for all, gate labels ABC, like if and only if the gate-by-gate operations of the circuit are being respected. Okay, so we have add twiddle ABC, right? So, the way to think of this is this is going to equal 0 unless A is an add gate and B and C are its in neighbors. So that's the whole point of introducing add twiddle and mult twiddle is, now we can feed in any 3 gate labels to them, and they're just going to kill anything unless B and C are actually the in neighbors of A, and A is an add gate. Okay, so if B and C are the in neighbors of A and A is an add gate, consider the expression Z twiddle of A minus the sum of Z twiddle of B plus Z twiddle C. So this expression equals 0, like, if and only if Z twiddle of A is what it should be, if B and C are the in neighbors. Okay. Yeah, so that kind of covers add gates, and then mult gates are analogous. So we got Z twiddle of A minus Z twiddle of B times Z twiddle C. Good. Yeah, so that's it. So we've kind of reformulated the condition that, for every addition gate A, Z twiddle assigns A the sum of the values it assigns to its in neighbors. And for every mult gate A, Z twiddle assigns to A the product of the values it assigns to its in neighbors. We've reformulated that as a certain polynomial, the one I've written here, vanishing over the Boolean hypercube. That is evaluating the 0 on any Boolean, 0, 1 valued input. Again, this is happening because if B and C are not the in neighbors of A, then both add twiddle and mult twiddle will kill everything. And if B and C are the in neighbors of A, then one of add twiddle and mult twiddle, depending on if A is an addition gate or multiplication gate, will equal 1, and that 1 will get multiplied by something that equals 0, like if and only if the value assigned to A is respects the operation of the gate A. Okay, questions? All right, so we're just about done describing the snark now. Unfortunately, yeah, so the question now is how does the verifier check that G vanishes over the Boolean hypercube? So that G of ABC equals 0. for all ABC in the 0, 1 to the 3 log circuit size. Okay. This gets it's just a little bit annoying. I'm going to start by telling you something that doesn't quite work, and then I'll tell you like what you can actually do that does work. Okay, so here's the thing that doesn't quite work. So actually, this thing does work if we were working not over a finite field, but over the integers. Okay, in that case, you could apply the sum check protocol to compute. So the sum over all Boolean vectors ABC, because that's what the sum check protocol does, is it sums, a low degree polynomial over the Boolean hypercube, not of G, but G squared. So that is, the square of G. And the idea here, like the reason, and confirm it equals 0. So what's happening here is if we're working over the integers, okay, if you sum up a bunch of squares and they equal 0, then every single one of them must be 0. Because if even a single one of the things that was squared was like not 0, then it's strictly positive because, you square an integer, you always get something positive. And over the integers, if you sum up a bunch of non-negative things, at least one of which is strictly positive, you get something strictly positive and hence not 0. Okay, so over the integers, like this sum being 0 is the same as the condition that every term in the sum is 0. For every ABC in the sum, so every ABC in the Boolean hypercube. Okay, so if we were working over the integers, that would be it. So we would just say, hey, apply the sum check protocol to the polynomial G squared, and that would work. So I'll shortly tell you what we actually do since we're not working over the integers, we're working over finite field. But let's just firstly briefly think about what the verification cost would be if we did apply the sum check protocol to G squared. Okay, so like if we did apply the sum check protocol to G squared, so the verification costs are, all right, so, G has 3 log circuit size variables, and the sum check protocol has 1 round for each variable. So that would be the number of rounds, right? Of course, we could apply fiat Shamir since it's a public coin protocol, to render it non-interactive. And in each round, so G squared is a polynomial, in 3 log circuit size variables. It has degree 4 in each variable, because G itself has degree 2 in each variable. So if you square it, it has degree 4 in each variable, which means that the prover in the sum check protocol sends a degree 4 univariate polynomial, which is 5 field elements in each round. Okay, which means that the total proof length across all the rounds is 5 times 3 log circuit size field elements, which is 15 times log circuit size field elements. Okay, and the verifier time is the time is up to a constant factor. That's just the time to read the proof, more or less. So let's just say that's order log circuit size field operations. Maybe it's like 32 field operations or something. I don't know. It could be 64, times log circuit size field operations. It's fast. It's fine. But also the verifier has to evaluate G squared at a random point. Let's say let me say R has 3 parts, R1, R2, R3. Each of these are in field to the log circuit size. Okay, so right, because remember in the sum check protocol, like at the very end, the verifier has to evaluate the polynomial being summed at a single random point. So if the polynomial is G squared, this is what that evaluation is. Now evaluating G squared at a random point, it's enough to evaluate G at that point and then square the result. So the key is really for the verifier to get to know G evaluated at this random point. Now remember, let me remind you what G is just by writing down the definition. It's add twiddle ABC, so R1, R2, R3, times Z twiddle. This is the committed polynomial of R1 minus the sum of Z twiddle of R2 plus Z twiddle of R3, plus mult twiddle of R1, R2, R3, times Z twiddle of R1 minus Z twiddle of R2 times Z twiddle of R3. Okay, so we discussed, I guess, with the GCAR protocol probably 2 weeks ago, we discussed like for circuits with repeated structure, these can be evaluated. The add twiddle and mult twiddle can be computed in like log circuit size time, roughly. So we discussed that for circuits with repeated structure that kind of do the same thing over and over again. And it, if that's not the case, there are ways that they can be committed cryptographically in pre-processing to thereby force the prover to provide these evaluations. So we said a little bit about that, and I'm happy to say more about it. And actually, some of those techniques are exactly those techniques are from Spartan and Marlin. Basically, you need to be able to commit to something called a sparse polynomial because that's what these add twiddle and mult twiddles are. And that's actually an important topic that I will say more about soon, but probably not today. Yeah, so anyway, so basically either these add twiddle and mult twiddle polynomials can be evaluated at the necessary point by the verifier itself very quickly. That's actually what I think is typically the case because most circuits people care about have repeated structure. And if not, there are other things you can do. And so then the other information the verifier needs is Z twiddle evaluated at the 3 points R1, R2, R3, and each of these can be had, by the polynomial commitment scheme. Comes equipped to provide these evaluations. And just as we saw with the GKR protocol, there are techniques. If you don't want to sort of pay for 3 evaluation proofs, you can sort of with 3 points, you can't draw a line through the points, but you can draw like some kind of degree 2 curve through the points, and like have the prover, send Z twiddle restricted to that curve. Let me call the curve, I don't know, lambda or something. Yeah. So I'll stop being so sketchy here, but yeah, we saw techniques so that if you don't want to make 3 different evaluation queries to the committed polynomial, you can actually only make 1. By sort of picking a 4th point along this curve, say, and evaluating Z twiddle at that 4th point instead, roughly. Okay, so that would be the verifier costs for this Clover snark. Again, it's logarithmically many field operations. Okay, plus you can get it down to 1. Like it's really dominated by 1 evaluation query to the committed polynomial. And there's this annoying technicality about add twiddle and mult twiddle, and how typically I claim, I assert that they can be evaluated in logarithmic time, and even if not, there are other things you can do. So yeah, so pretty nice verification costs. The proofs are not as small as like Marlin, Planck's, and Gross 16 because those achieve. Those proofs are just somewhere between 3 and 12 group elements, and like the log many field elements in this proof will sort of take up more space than 3 to 12 group elements. But it's still pretty small, and like certainly vastly smaller than like Frey proofs that sometimes are going on chain today. And then whether or not the evaluation proof, for the 1 evaluation query to commit a polynomial, like whether or not that's really cheap or less cheap just depends on the polynomial commitment scheme you use, is the short version. Yeah. Okay. So, any questions about the verifier costs in this snark? Okay, so the only remaining thing I have to tell you is, we can't actually just apply sum check to G squared because we're not working over the integers. So it is possible that you sum up a bunch of perfect squares in a finite field and they kind of wrap around and wind up summing to zero, even though, they're not all zero individually. So let me explain that. But just before I do that, let me just briefly compare this verification cost to the GKR-based snark. So anything using the GKR protocol, remember the proof length there was circuit depth times log circuit size, many field elements. And we were dealing there with, fan-in two circuits, just as we were dealing with here, meaning that the depth is always at least log circuit size. Okay, which means that the proof length and verifier time there for GKR is always at least and typically about log squared to circuit size. So here we have costs whereby, up to, what polynomial commitment scheme you use, if we just sort of ignore those costs, which, you can make that have logarithmic costs if you choose an appropriate polynomial commitment scheme, the proof size here is just logarithmic. So these are shorter proofs. These are better proofs for the verifier, quadratically so. So we have log squared coming out of the GKR protocol and log here. Okay, and I'd say that's one of the major benefits of this Clover snark and something like Spartan, which we'll talk about next week, relative to GKR based snarks. The other major benefit, which we'll talk about next week, is Spartan, which is sort of a descendant of Clover, applies not just to arithmetic circuits of fan and two. It actually applies to all of the circuits people like to use in practice today, which include R1CS, Planckish, arithmetization, air, and this new generalization of all three that we're calling CCS. So those would be the two benefits of something like Spartan over GKR based things is shorter proofs and applies directly to more expressive circuits. And yeah, the key to both of these, like relative to the GKR protocol, the reason that this is achievable is that in like Spartan, and what we saw today, the entire the prover commits to the entire circuit rather than just the witness. So it doesn't have to go layer by layer through the circuit. So that lets you kind of wind up moving to more expressive circuits that you can't necessarily go layer by. It might not even make sense to go layer by layer through them. And also keeps the proof shorter. And as I've discussed previously, sort of the downside is you're applying the polynomial commitment scheme, which involves expensive cryptography to the whole circuit and not just the witness. So like you're paying the cost of cryptography, you're applying it to a bigger thing. So they're kind of trade-offs everywhere. Yeah, so that's how to understand the comparison of today's snark and its descendants, especially Spartan, relative to last week's. Okay, questions? Cool. Okay, so the last thing to tell you is like how does it actually work, because it's not enough to just sum up the evaluations of G squared. That does not work. So this is what we actually do. Okay, so let me explain things this way. Here's a fact. Okay, because G, because G is not multilinear, right? It's degree 2 in each variable, right? It's like, one of its terms was add twiddle, but then that's multilinear, but that got multiplied by this other multilinear thing. And if you multiply, kind of two multilinear things, they're no longer necessarily multilinear, right? So G is not multilinear, it's degree 2 in each variable. And because of that, okay, G vanishing over the Boolean hypercube You know, it can equal 0. It can do that. It can equal 0 for all Boolean inputs. Okay, while not equaling 0 at like almost any other inputs. So while not equaling 0 at almost all inputs in the field. In field to the 3-log circuit size. Right. So yeah, it's you can vanish at all these Boolean inputs while being non-zero at almost all inputs if you know in the larger domain consisting of the whole field. Okay, that is not the case. That would not be the case for a multilinear polynomial. Okay, so for a multilinear polynomial, let me call it H. Okay, if H vanishes over the Boolean hypercube, that is, if it's equals 0 over all, if it equals 0 for all Boolean inputs, then it has to be the 0 polynomial. Okay, this is because like multilinear extensions are unique. Right, so if H equals 0 for all Boolean inputs, that means it's the multilinear extension of like the all zeros function. Clearly, the all zeros polynomial is, you know, a multilinear extension of the all zeros function, right? It equals 0 everywhere, including in the Boolean hypercube. And multilinear extensions are unique. So any multilinear polynomial that equals 0 at all Boolean inputs has to be the 0 polynomial. Okay, which means that, you know, if it were the case that G were multilinear, but it's not. But if G were multilinear, then checking that G of ABC vanishes over the Boolean hypercube. If it were multilinear, so I should write that if G were multilinear, you know, checking what the verifier wants to check, checking that GABC vanishes over the Boolean hypercube, it would be enough, let me say, to check this, you know, the verifier can just pick a random input. So can pick an R at random from field to the 3-log circuit size and just check if G of R equals 0, right? Because, you know, obviously if G is the all zeros polynomial, this check will pass with probability 1. And if G is not the all zeros polynomial, then by Schwartz-Zippel, the probability over R that G of R equals 0. If G is multilinear, that probability is at most the number of variables, which is 3-log circuit size over field size. You know, so if you work over a big enough field, that's tiny. Okay, so what I'm saying is G is not multilinear, but if it were multilinear, then checking what the verifier wants to check, namely that it vanishes over the Boolean hypercube, it would be enough to just evaluate G at a random point and check that the result is 0. Okay, so the idea is what we're going to do is we want to replace G, okay, with the unique multilinear polynomial. So the unique multilinear polynomial H, such that H and G agreed at all Boolean inputs. Okay, because this polynomial H, as the unique multilinear polynomial that agrees with G at all Boolean inputs, you know, H vanishing over the Boolean hypercube is the same as G vanishing over the Boolean hypercube. And because H is multilinear, H vanishing over the Boolean hypercube can be checked by picking a random R and checking that H of R equals 0. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a nice expression for this H, this unique multilinear polynomial that agrees with G at all Boolean inputs. Okay, and then I'm going to, we'll see that, you know, that expresses H of R in a way that lets us compute H of R via the sum check protocol. So what we're going to do is we'll compute this via the sum check protocol. Okay. So let me give the nice expression for this unique multilinear polynomial H that has the same behavior as G at all Boolean inputs. Remember, H and G might disagree wildly outside the Boolean hypercube, but we're going to make sure that H and G agree at the Boolean hypercube. Okay, so yeah, let me just write it out. So H of ABC is going to be the sum over all A prime, B prime, C prime in 0, 1 to the 3 log S, log circuit size of, so an equality function. So this, I mean like the multilinear extension, MLE, of the so-called equality function. So I'll explain this in more detail in a second. But this is going to take 2 inputs. It's going to take, well, they're really, each of its 2 inputs is 3 log S, 3 log circuit size variables. So it's going to take as input, one input is ABC and the other input is A prime, B prime, C prime. Okay, and then we're going to multiply that by G of, sorry for running out of space. It's a really bad point to run out of space, so let me try to regain the space. Okay, yeah, so we're going to multiply that equality thing by G of A prime, B prime, C prime. Okay, yeah, so what's happening is, yeah, so let's check. Let's check that H is multilinear. You know, so the right-hand side here, that the right-hand side is multilinear. And that for any Boolean input ABC, it does the same thing. It spits out the same thing as G does. So let me say, I'll just say it equals, the right-hand side equals G of ABC. Okay, so let's check those 2 things. And if we check those 2 things, then indeed, this right-hand side here is the unique multilinear polynomial that agrees with G at all Boolean inputs. Okay, so in terms of it being multilinear, you know, the inputs to ABC only, you know, they get fed into this equality thing. The equality thing is a multilinear polynomial sort of by definition. So this whole thing is multilinear. So you know, the thing appearing in the sum. So if you like for a second, if you like ignore, you know, the sum thing. So this thing being summed, right? It's not multilinear in A prime, B prime, C prime because, well, for one, G is not multilinear in A prime, B prime, C prime. But on top of that, A prime, B prime, C prime is also getting fed into this EQ thing, which increases the degree in each variable by 1. You know, on top of the fact that G is already not multilinear. However, it is multilinear in ABC because ABC appears sort of only once getting fed into a multilinear thing. Okay, so this thing is multilinear. And the reason, now let's check that for any ABC in the Boolean hypercube, the right-hand side spits out G of ABC. And hopefully we're starting to get used to this sort of thing. But basically we've got, you know, a huge number of terms in the sum. There's actually circuit size cube many terms. Okay, but this equality function ensures that everything dies except for the one term where A prime, B prime, C prime equals ABC. So this equality thing is 0. If ABC is in the Boolean hypercube, this equality thing is 0 except for when A prime, B prime, C prime equals ABC. And in that case, this equality thing spits out 1 and it gets multiplied by G of A prime, B prime, C prime, which is G of ABC. So that's what's happening. So this right-hand side is multilinear and it spits out the same thing as G does whenever you feed into it a Boolean input. Cool. Okay. So in summary, this right-hand side here is the unique multilinear polynomial H that agrees with G over the Boolean hypercube. which means that checking that G vanishes over the Boolean hypercube, can be done by picking a random R and checking that H of R is 0. Okay, and computing H of R, that is simply done by applying the sum check protocol to compute H of R, which means to apply sum check to the polynomial Q of A prime, B prime, C prime, defined to be equality at R, comma, A prime, B prime, C prime, times G of A prime, B prime, C prime. Okay, so Q is a polynomial in these 3 log circuit size variables. Q has degree 3 in each variable, because G has degree 2 in each variable, and then those same variables appear once getting fed into the multilinear thing EQ. Okay. And so you apply the sum check protocol to Q, right? So the number of rounds again is the number of variables, so 3 log circuit size. The prover sends a degree 3 univariate polynomial in each round, so that's 4 field elements. So the total proof length would be 12 times log circuit size. That's the proof length. Field elements in the proof. And at the end, the verifier has to evaluate Q at a random point, which is the same as evaluating G at a random point, and we already discussed that. That requires evaluating add twiddle and mod twiddle at that point, and evaluating the committed polynomial z twiddle at the 3 points R1, R2, R3, and you can reduce the 3 to 1 and so forth. And then the only other thing, in order to evaluate Q at a random point, the verifier doesn't just need G at that point, it also needs EQ at that point. But this EQ thing actually always can be evaluated in logarithmic time, in log circuit size time. You can actually just write out a nice expression for it. Let me just give a little example, like EQ twiddle of, let's say, A1, B1, C1, comma, A2, B2, C2. Okay, where each of these are just one variable each, just to make the example simple. So these are each one variable. In general, they'd be log circuit size many variables, but in this example, let's just say they're one variable each. Okay, that would just be, I'll just write it out without product notation. So like you want to test that A1 equals A2. Okay, so what is the multilinear polynomial that tests that? That's A1 times A2 plus 1 minus A1 times 1 minus A2, right? Because if this is a multilinear polynomial that maps 1, 1. If A1 and A2 are both 1, then you get out 1 because this term is 1 and this term is 0. If they're both 0, you get out 1 because this term is 0 and this term is 1. And if 1 is 1 and the other is 0, both terms are 0. So this is the multilinear extension of like the 1-bit equality function that just takes as input 2 bits A1 and A2 and tests like are they equal, right? And so the equality function over these 3 bits, 2 3-bit tuples, it would just be the product of 3 independent equality functions. So the second one is B1 times B2 plus 1 minus B1 times 1 minus B2. Third is C1 times C2 plus 1 minus C1 times 1 minus C2. Okay, and yeah, so you can just check that this is a multilinear polynomial, and this will equal 1 if A1 equals A2, B1 equals B2, C1 equals C2, and they're all in they're all in 0, 1, and it equals 0 if they're all in 0, 1. And they're not, otherwise. So it equals 0 otherwise if they're all in 0, 1. So that means it is the multilinear extension of the equality function. So the verifier can, when the verifier needs to evaluate the polynomial sum check was applied to at a random point, that entails evaluating G at a random point, which we discussed before, and evaluating this equality function at a random point. And evaluating this equality function at a random point can be done in log circuit size time, just because it's like a product over log, like 3 log circuit size many terms. Is it 3? Yeah, it's 3 log circuit size many terms, and then each term just looks like this. So some variable times another variable plus 1 minus, the first variable times 1 minus the other variable. Yeah, so that's the snark. That's it. Okay. And as I've been presenting these sum check based snarks, I've never really been talking about prover time, but it's now known, like in Clover, as in the GKR protocol, you can make the prover run in time, like order circuit size many field operations, plus the time to commit to the circuit transcript and produce one evaluation proof. Okay, and so this stuff is sort of all asymptotically optimal in a sense, because even to just evaluate the circuit gate by gate, you need this many field ops, and we just don't really know how to design snarks without somebody committing to the circuit and producing one evaluation committing to the circuit multilinear extension or your low degree extension and producing one evaluation of it. Great. Yeah. So that's it for today. I assume someone's going to ask, questions, since no one's asked anything in a long time, and it's been a technical, topic. But just to summarize or remind you, like Spartan is quite conceptually similar, but like extends from circuit sat to R1CS. So next time I will tell you what is R1CS and describe Spartan for it. Marlin was also originally described for R1CS. Again, this recent paper that I have kind of extends both to this much more general kind of circuit we're calling CCS. And so depending on how time goes, I might be able to do Spartan and Marlin in one day, because kind of once you know R1CS, you can actually cover Spartan and Marlin both pretty quickly. Yeah, so that's everything, and that's the preview for next week. So let me just stop here. Thank you, as always, for coming and staying for almost 90 minutes, and just let me know if you have any questions.
I have a small question, just to make sure I understood well. H over when the verifier computes it, what does the verifier actually knows? It knows the twiddle function. I don't remember the name, but yeah.
With H?
Yeah.
With H, yeah. Okay. So the verifier knows, like EQ twiddle is just a function which can be evaluated in logarithmic time, and it's known to the verifier. Okay. G, remember, G is, I'll just write it out again. It's add twiddle times this committed thing, Z twiddle at A minus, the sum of it at B and C, and then there's malt twiddle, you add in malt twiddle ABC times Z twiddle of A minus Z twiddle of B times Z twiddle C. Okay, so the verifier knows add twiddle and malt twiddle. It knows a description of the circuit.
Yeah.
That add twiddle,
That's the circuits.
The add twiddle and malt twiddle like specify the circuit. Okay. And the circuit is like, you're thinking of it as big. So the verifier, doesn't want to like kind of specify the circuit by like actually writing down like every, for every gate, what are its neighbors or whatever. So for circuits with repeated structure, like the circuit will actually be described as, the circuit, does this simple thing a billion times, right? That might be roughly the description of the circuit. And based on that description, here's the simple thing, the circuit does it a billion times. Based on that description, the verifier can very quickly evaluate add twiddle and malt twiddle at a desired point. And even if that's not the case, because the circuit doesn't have a simple description, shorter than just literally writing down every wire, every gate in the circuit, you could have somebody honest, they do have to be honest, but somebody honest commit these polynomials in pre-processing. So then the verifier just knows like a commitment to the circuit, specifically to these circuit polynomials. and that thereby can force the prover to provide the necessary evaluations of the committed polynomials once the verifier knows at what point it needs to evaluate them. So basically, the verifier's description of add twiddle and mod twiddle is either in the form of like a simple description of the circuit itself, or it's like the verifier is kind of handed by an honest party a commitment to the circuit. You know, like in a roll up, you know, any roll up that's using Planck today. Okay, they've sort of they're handing the smart contract that's implementing the Planck verifier. They're handing that smart contract like a KZG commitment to some analog of these add and mod polynomials, roughly. You know, I'm waving my hands because we didn't talk about Planck today. We talked about, you know, Clover.
Okay.
But conceptually, that's what's happening. Yeah. And then the Z-twiddle thing is just the verifier just has a commitment to it. So it has no idea what Z-twiddle is. It just has like a, you know, one hash value or one group element that sort of binds the prover to Z-twiddle.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah. Great question. Other questions?
If anyone else doesn't have questions, so I was reading the Spartan paper, and I want to ask, like, is the so sparse polynomial, dense polynomials only happens with R1CS?
No, like really any circuit has a sparse polynomial. Sort of the wiring of the circuit is naturally captured by a sparse polynomial. I mean, the idea is like you know, every gate, you know, every wiring information is information about connections between, you know, multiple gates. You know, like a wire connects two gates to each other, right? So like naturally the space over which like the wires of any kind of circuit, no matter what sort of you know, notion of a circuit you use, the space over which it's, you know, the wires are defined is like quadratically bigger than the space of quote gates, right? Because the wire connects two gates to each other. And so, but the circuit size is like the number of wires. Okay, so like that always means like a small circuit. What typically like a, you know, like a small circuit is typically going to have more gates that what do I want to say? Fewer wires than the maximum number of possible wires given, you know, the number of gates, right? Like it's rarely the case that like every gate is connected to almost every other gate. So sparse polynomials kind of always arise, whether you're talking about R1CS or circuits or, you know, Planckish or what have you. It's just you know, sparse polynomials abound when you try to describe like the structure of the circuit, like, you know, the wires or whatever. And so if you're, for that reason, I think this abstraction of a sparse polynomial commitment scheme is like really essential and kind of underappreciated. You know, it's just a way to commit to these polynomials that sort of, you know, they're sparse. Like they, in some sense, like the space of possible coefficients is quadratically or even more, you know, cubically in this case, and add and mod is cubically bigger than the number of sort of non-zeros. You know, if most pairs of gates are not connected to each other by a wire, then the polynomial that captures the wires is sparse, right? Because like most pairs of gates, like the number of coefficients is like all pairs of gates, but most pairs of gates are not connected by a wire, so it's sparse. And so Marlin and Spartan like both explicitly give sparse polynomial commitment schemes. For Marlin, it considers sparse bivariate polynomials. And that's because, you know, it's kind of using univariate polynomials at its core. And if you sort of, you know, represent gate values with univariate polynomials, then, you know, pairs of gate values are naturally represented by bivariate polynomials. Spartan, the sparse polynomials are multilinear, right? Because we represent like gate values with multilinear polynomials, and then like kind of capturing pairs of gate values would just be another multilinear polynomial, but over like twice as many variables or something. And my view of Planck is that it sort of really tries hard. It's not explicit because this notion of sparse polynomial commitments wasn't even like around when Planck was written, because it was kind of really kind of isolated in the Marlin and Spartan papers. But so I'm not attributing intention to the authors here, but basically, like, Planck, in comparison to Marlin and Spartan, sort of assiduously avoids like giving a sparse polynomial commitment scheme. It does something kind of similar, but doesn't quite, certainly never introduces the abstraction of a sparse polynomial commitment, and actually doesn't quite seem to quite give a general sparse polynomial commitment scheme. And like, in my view, that's actually the underlying reason why Planck like does not extend to R1CS, much less like CCS, but Marlin and Spartan like they do handle R1CS and CCS. So just some rambling thoughts about I hope that people kind of like study sparse polynomial commitments as objects in their own right a little more soon.
Is it the copy constraint in Planck?
That's sort of. I think it's all related. I think so. In Planck, they have these copy constraints where, like, basically, if you have a gate and it has many wires coming out of it, right, then all of those wires need to be assigned the same value. And so Planck will introduce a copy constraint. What will actually introduce a new variable for each wire. So there'll be like 4 variables, one per wire. Let me just call them x1, x2, x3, x4. And there'll be a copy constraint that basically says all 4 variables have to be assigned the same value, that value being whatever value like this gate A has. And so there's actually extra cryptographic costs here in the snark, because the prover has to commit, to, now four values for gate A, one per wire coming out of it. Whereas in Marlin and Spartan, the prover would be committing just to a single value for gate A. So basically, like the kind of the deduplicated, it would be a deduplicated witness, if you will. So that means, 4x the cryptographic cost for the prover here in this little example, if you use Planck. And I think the need, in some level, if you squint hard enough, I think the reason, that there are these extra costs in Planck is kind of because it's avoiding capturing the wiring of the circuit via a sparse polynomial commitment scheme. So that's sort of forcing Planck to kind of treat these wires like separately, and thereby introduce a variable for each wire. Whereas Spartan and Marlin only introduce a variable for each gate, right? Not each wire. And I guess this really comes up. The difference really comes up when it when Spartan in particular, when it's applied to a uniform circuit, where the prover does not have to commit to like the analogs of these added mod polynomials, because in that case, there is at that point nowhere in the protocol where in the Spartan protocol where the prover is paying cryptographically for the wires in the circuit, right? In Spartan applied to a uniform circuit, the prover only pays cryptographically, only does crypto operations for gates, not for wires. Okay, so that's where you really see a difference between something like Spartan and something like Planck. And I think in the end you can attribute it to Spartan like using a sparse polynomial commitment scheme, and Planck kind of like avoiding it. That's more opinion than formal statement there, but yeah. Was that a little bit helpful?
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. And I have like just I'm wondering, like, so because yeah, I'm kind of wondering why people are not like paying more attention to linear prover linear snarks, because I think you can just maybe just feel free to point out my like logical errors or whatever, but I think you can just use like linear snarks uh for like for proving and like an aggregation, and in the end use like so in the bottom layer use something like gross 16 to like publish the constant proof to the blockchains, right?
Yeah. So, great
And
question. And I guess by linear, you mean like linear time proof, like breakdown and Orion and stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's two things. So one is, I actually think today with, something like breakdown, I think the verifier, is still a little too big when you turn it into a circuit to like comfortably apply gross 16 to. I think like Orion ran into issues. The reason Orion proofs are still like over a megabyte or whatever, is because they were not able to take the breakdown verifier, in full and turn it into a circuit and apply Virgo to that circuit. I think there's progress on that. We just saw like there's a new ePrint that lowers the breakdown proof size by like a factor of 2 or something, and also speeds up the prover by something like that factor. So we're making progress on this, but I think the proposal to kind of take like something like a breakdown proof and wrap it in gross 16, I think is just a little bit beyond what people would want to apply gross 16 to today. Um, the other comment is, it's not exactly clear that the linear time things are that much faster than the quasi-linear time things, that use like Reed-Solomon codes on the circuit sizes people are using today, because there's this popular paradigm of taking like a giant circuit and breaking it down into smaller pieces and kind of snarking each piece and then like aggregating the proofs or something. And in that paradigm, you just never get a single circuit that's that big, because anything big enough you just break into smaller pieces. So the asymptotic benefit of like linear time snarks, I think might not kick in. And there's also like weird practical issues of memory access patterns possibly being like a bottleneck more than like field work or something. And so it gets very hard to compare, on like actual hardware, what would or wouldn't be better, and it can depend a lot on how big the circuit is. And again, people are breaking things, big circuits into small ones. I think people are paying attention. In fact, I know that there are projects actively looking at exactly this, and these projects today are using Fry and are interested in switching. And one reason they're interested in switching is because the need to work over like an FFT friendly field is still annoying, even though we do have a lot of FFT friendly fields. It's still a nuisance. And they see potential benefits in it, the same reason you're asking the question. So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of considerations at play here, between the proof size in these linear time snarks still being a little bit too big to kind of wrap them in like a Planck or gross 16 proof at the end, and just like idiosyncratic details about practical performance. So I'm optimistic. Kind of the linear time snarks will be useful, moving forward. But I think there's maybe still a little more work to do, and just a little more, complicated, details that we need to, kind of compare between linear time and non-linear time options.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, because maybe the details I'm not sure. Yeah, but and one other thing is like, can you briefly or maybe like just talk about the tensor IOP thing, because it's not very intuitive to me.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you my personal view of them, which is the following. Am I still sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, some but not all polynomial commitment schemes exploit the following structure in polynomial evaluation queries, right? So, like if say I have a polynomial p and I want to evaluate p at r. Okay. So let me take the coefficients of p. We can do univariate polynomials if you'd like, just to make things simpler. This applies to multilinear as well. So say I take the coefficients of p, say c0, c1, and I write them like as a square. So I just break the coefficients into a square, right? So I can write p of r as the inner product of the coefficients, this coefficient vector c, and the powers of r. So r to the 0, r to the 1, up to r to the degree. But a cool thing here is that this powers of r vector has tensor structure. Okay. So for example, that means sort of like what one-dimensional tensor structure would tell you, and I'll get hand wavy here, just to avoid spending too much time answering this, but you can express this inner product as like a vector matrix vector product, where one vector is, I think it's the first root n powers of r, and the other vector, I might be reversing this, but whatever. The other vector is, like powers of r to the root n. Okay. So that's like one-dimensional tensor structure. Okay, but these queries actually have like log d. Sorry, I switched from d to n. Let me just say n. These queries actually have log n dimensional tensor structure. Okay, whereby so basically this vector, this powers of r, can actually be written as like a log dimensional outer product or something, where it's like 1 comma r, tensor itself. I might not be saying it exactly right, but you get the idea. So if I just look at 1 comma r tensor 1 comma r, like that would be a length 4 vector with entries like 1 comma r squared. Did I mess this up? Okay, yeah, I guess I might have messed this up. 1 r, you get 1 r, and then yeah, I think I went it'd be 1 comma r tensor 1 comma r squared. So the outer product of 1 r and 1 r squared is like the first like 4 powers of r. You get you take 1 and you multiply it by 1 and r squared, so that'll give you like 1 and r. You multiply r by 1 and r squared, and you get r and r cubed, something like that. And you can keep doing this, right? If you want to get the next powers of r appended there, you would take this thing and you would tensor it with it's probably like 1 comma r to the 4th or something. So it has this tensor structure. Okay, so I think my like kind of 10,000 foot view of tensor IOPs is they're just giving basically like, I don't know, like IOP based inner product like support for inner product queries where one vector in the inner product has exactly this tensor structure. Okay, so that's like I just view these tensor IOPs. They're just polynomial commitment schemes that exploit this tensor structure in the evaluation vector of polynomial evaluation queries. Okay, so the papers use this different language of tensor IOPs, and I think they're just giving like an IOP based inner product scheme that requires one of the 2 vectors in the in the product to have this tensor structure, and ultimately one only needs a polynomial commitment scheme for snark, right? So I think ultimately, like these only really get these quote tensor IOPs really only get applied as to polynomial commitment queries. So yeah, this is like highly personal view. I just everything in these papers in my head, I just translate to polynomial commitment scheme that exploits this tensor structure in the vector consisting of like powers of R, or in the multilinear case, it would be all Lagrange basis polynomials evaluated at R. Those vectors have exactly this tensor structure that is then exploited by these works that call them tensor IOPs. Was that helpful?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I never linked the top one with the bottom one. So I guess the bottom one is a generalization of the top.
Yeah. So like
one-dimensional case.
This thing here, this vector matrix vector multiplication, is like follows from like taking this like log dimensional outer product thing and sort of just splitting it in two. If you split it in two, like one outer product turns into this vector and the other outer product turns into this vector.
Yeah. And how does the bottom one help with making the prover linear, I guess?
It doesn't. It's basically the verifier costs of these things that just do vector matrix vector. The verifier costs turn out to be like root n typically. Okay. If you want to lower the verifier cost below root n, you can kind of exploit tensor structure beyond just what I'm calling here like kind of one-dimensional tensor structure. So you can go to like verifier cost like n to the 1/3 by exploiting two-dimensional tensor structure. You can go to verifier cost like n to the 1/4 by exploiting three-dimensional tensor structure. Unfortunately, these works have I'm hiding a cost of something exponential in the dimensionality. So there's some like 2 to the dimension here. So this is like n to the 1/1 plus dimension. But then there's so that's something that's getting smaller as the dimension grows, but there's some other term that's getting bigger as the dimension grows, and that prevents you from taking the dimension bigger than constant, because once then that term becomes like something you can't ignore anymore. But if this sort of thing is a lot to follow, they're really just doing something that's like very analogous to just snark recursion, right? So if I take a snark with like square root n verifier costs and I compose it like with itself, right? That will reduce the verifier cost to n to the 1/4, right? Because you wind up like taking the verifier of the first snark, which has size root n, and you apply the snark to that to prove like a proof that would have satisfied that root n time verification, and that proof size will have size square root of that, so square root of root n, which is n to the 1/4. And you could like compose that with itself and reduce the proof size to n to the 1/8. And it's sort of this something analogous is happening here, where like the more dimensions of products of tensor structure you exploit, like the smaller the verifier costs are getting. So somehow taking like you get root n costs with one dimension, taking like a one-dimensional thing and a one-dimensional thing and composing them is somewhat analogous to having like maybe I should call this like 2 dimensions instead of 1. So taking 2 dimensions and 2 dimensions and composing them is very close to like having 4 dimensions, and then taking 2 4-dimensional things and composing them is very close to like having 8 dimensions. So yeah, I think what's happening in this in these tensor IOP works is it's not using snark recursion. It's not the same, but it's the effects are exactly analogous. So by going to like higher dimensional tensor structure, it's a lot like kind of taking a like a square root verifier cost snark and composing it with itself several times. The more dimensionality you exploit in the tensor structure, it's like the more layers of recursion you have. hopefully that intuition is a little bit helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And so, and the one-dimensional case is what Hyrax and Lahero did. Right?
Exactly.
And the bottom part is what breakdown did.
No, breakdown is also like Hyrax and Lahero, but just like Lahero uses the Reed-Solomon code, breakdown just replaces it with a linear time encodable code. This stuff about going to higher dimensionality tensor structure, I think really the only paper that does this is BCG. And again, you can get the same effects through snark composition. The security analyses will be different and more heuristic, but the cost for the verifier will be the same. So yeah, I think BCG is the main one that did this. And there's this follow-up BCL, which was like looking to make it zero knowledge. You can also get zero knowledge like just directly through snark composition. Like you take a non-ZK thing and you compose it with a ZK thing. But BCL, we're looking to do it like without snark composition. Yeah, so I think those would be the two things.
Yeah. And so Hyrax uses Pedersen commitment, and Lahero uses Reed-Solomon code.
Yes, oh, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I don't think I have any other questions for now.
Okay.
But
sounds good. Yeah, these are great questions. So, thanks for bringing them up and talking about them. Yeah, it's hard to get this context, especially if you're reading the original papers. Yeah, great questions to bring up.
It's always the math notations that.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, also like the viewpoint I'm like expressing here, and which I write papers and in the book and sort of express everything through the prism of polynomial commitments. And a lot of the papers don't do that. They don't express things in that prism, and it's not even clear to me that the authors are aware that they can be viewed through that prism. So I might when I say, oh, BCG do this for polynomial commitments or something, like I might be sort of projecting my own kind of way of viewing the paper onto the paper itself, and that view is not in the paper or whatever. So if you're just reading the papers themselves, there's both like a ton of math notation and it might not be expressing things in the same way that you see them expressed when you kind of get your information filtered through if you're talking to me or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind if I just ask math notations? Because
sure, I can try. I might not know the notation either.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't have any other questions for now.
Okay,
sounds good. I may have to look at the Spartan code to understand like the rest of the things, but yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I will say the sparse polynomial commitment scheme in Spartan is like kind of the bulk of the complexity. So I just like didn't discuss that today. So if you look at like the Spartan code base, like most of the code is implementing the sparse polynomial commitment scheme. I have a new paper coming out in the next couple of weeks that I think will further clarify what's going on in that sparse polynomial commitment scheme. So maybe don't knock your head against the wall too hard now, because I might be able to share something helpful in the next maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah, that would be great. Cause I don't understand they call it Spark compiler.
Yeah, Spark. Yeah.
I don't understand that part.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's by far the most complicated thing, and wait 3 weeks and then let's talk about it. Rather, it'll be much easier to talk about in 3 weeks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. No further questions.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thanks for all the questions. Great questions. And yeah, I'll have a great weekend and I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.
Bye.